Hi, I'm Dan Schmitt. I do a weekly television show called Team Chicago Challenge. My website is teamchicago.tv. My email, if you want to contact me, is teamdan45@gmail.com. Doing a public access television show, I have finally reached 1,500 shows, which is quite a milestone. I've been doing this TV show for over 30 years now. This is show number 1,500. My granddaughter Taylor is going to join me, and we're going to start looking through my photo albums, which I'm pretty proud of. So in the next 26 minutes, 27 minutes, we're going to show some of these. How did I get into racing? What is motorcycle racing? What was it like back in the 70s? And I think you'll enjoy these shows. So we may end up doing 8 or 9 or 10 shows going through these books and explaining about motorcycle racing. And don't forget my email. I'd like to hear from you. It's teamdan45@gmail.com. Now Taylor, I should point out, when we were road racing, probably went to and probably drove with me tens of thousands of miles, went to many, many races. She scored at these races. She would score for Team Chicago and other teams, and she always made a little bit of money too. And the amount of time on the highway talking, I mean, the two of us together was, priceless, I think. So I got my photo albums. I'm pretty proud of my photo albums. And they tell the story of racing, if you want to talk, from 1970 all the way through to the present day. And we're going to go through these albums. This is show number 1,500. We may go to 1,510 covering this history. And I think it's a good history of motorcycle racing and what motorcycle racing is all about. So Taylor, thanks for coming on the show. I know you're kind of busy with kids now. God, how can you get so old on me? So what's your first question for me about motorcycling?
Well, how'd you get into motorcycle racing at first?
Well, to get into motorcycle, let's talk about that first. My family is not a motorcycle family, per se. But the first person to own a two-wheel vehicle was my brother Bob. And I think I have a picture of Bob on his Vespa. So back then in Illinois, in the late 1950s, you could get a license for a two-wheel vehicle if it was under 5 horsepower at 14. So Bob was delivering newspapers, and he had to deal with Manor News. In fact, I even have the title, a copy of the title and the bill of sale. I'm going to show that as I'm talking. So he bought this scooter, and it came with a sidecar. So it was a Vespa scooter with a sidecar. Instead of the metal sidecar, it had a wooden box so he could deliver newspapers. And back then, with Manor News, they would deliver Sun-Times and Tribunes. And so that was how his involvement having the scooter. And I still remember him changing the sidecar over to a regular sidecar for passengers. We went on vacation to Gage's Lake, and I rode all the way to Gage's Lake, which was like a big trip back then. I mean, it was like 45 miles from Chicago, go to Gage's Lake, and that was like huge, and that was a big deal. And I still remember we went to church in Grays Lake, St. Gilbert's. God, why do I remember these things? And taking my mother to church on Sunday in the sidecar.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I remember a dog chasing us down the road in the sidecar. But in the Vespa, when my mother was in the sidecar, I could sit. He had a passenger seat on his Vespa. So if I got some pictures of the Vespa, I'm going to show him.
Oh, definitely.
So that's how we were into two-wheel. Now, my dad never rode motorcycles. My dad was not a motorcycle type person, but he did love automobiles. My dad, without a doubt, he did his own work on his car, and he was a car guy, and he loved to drive. So that's one thing why when we would go to the races, I mean, we literally, you and I, going to Summit Point, which is 800 miles away, we would do that in 16 hours.
Right.
I mean, straight through. And still, here's a good story. I dislocated my shoulder.
Oh, jeez, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And that's back when I had the Ford with a stick shift. And who did all the shifting
I did.
all the way home? Right. Floor shifting, first, second, third, fourth, fifth gear. So that's how Taylor and I mean, we hundreds of hours of conversations. I mean, it was, I've been blessed. I mean, I've been blessed having grandkids like you. There's no doubt about it. We had big fun.
Oh, definitely.
So that's, all right. And also in this Vespa, that's how I broke my leg. My brother was going to Notre Dame. The Vespa was in the garage. I'm 15 years old. So I would push the Vespa out of the garage, halfway down the alley, start it up and go ride around the neighborhood. So we're out there one time, and Eddie White, now who is Eddie White? And Eddie White, if you're watching, if you're not in prison or if you're not dead yet, if you look in the Encyclopedia Britannica under juvenile delinquent, you'll see Eddie White's picture. He was a juvenile delinquent of the neighborhood. And I let him ride the bike, and I got on the back. He went around the corner, hit a parked car, compound fracture leg. I mean, laying on the ground, yeah. But then when I was working, I drove the coffee truck starting in high school, and then I bought my Triumph motorcycle. But I might have already been married when I bought my Triumph, so I bought a 650 Triumph Bonneville, and that would have been 1969. And when your mom was just a baby. And then, all right, so now I'm going to get into how I got into racing.
Okay.
I mean, it's another great story. The guys from A Cycle World, and A Cycle World was on Western Avenue, right by Montrose, 4300 Western, the largest motorcycle dealer in Chicago at that time. And the guys from A Cycle World, the mechanics and all that, but even the salesmen, Billy Von Esser and HUD. HUD was the big gang leader in the back and one of the mechanics. They went to Santa Fe Speedway every Wednesday night. So they would say, why don't you come to Santa Fe Speedway? So the only exposure I had to that point of motorcycles and racing was the guys in the neighborhood. I should mention, one of my best friends, George Grace, that I worked at the grocery store back in 6th grade. By the time George Grace was in 8th grade, he bought a Triumph motorcycle, and for 2 or 3 years, he was working on it in the garage down the alley from where I lived on Kedzie and Wilson. And Mike Kropp and them guys also had motorcycles, and Jim Hargrove. And we went to the drag strip one time. If you go to a drag strip with a motorcycle, you are treated like a third-rate citizen.
Oh, jeez.
They'll make you sit on the side. You don't even get to go down the strip until you get 10 or 8 together, and then they may allow you to run down the strip. But you're treated badly at the drag strip. So I would I went to the drag strip twice with them guys, and I thought racing motorcycles was drag racing. So finally, one Wednesday night, I met over at A Cycle World. We all, like 10 or 12 of us, and we had to leave by like 5 o'clock. So we had to drive through rush hour traffic to get to Santa Fe Speedway. Santa Fe Speedway is 91st and Wolf Road. And I can still remember to this day, walking in, you walked in the front gate of Santa Fe Speedway, the beer concession stand was here, the grandstands was up here, and the track was straight ahead. And I went to the fence, and I looked at the racing, and I went, man, I want to do this. I thought it was the coolest thing I ever seen in my life. And that was professional racing.
Right.
So you couldn't just race the Santa Fe Speedway. So I went, even that day, that first time I was at Santa Fe, I went up to the announcer's booth, who happened to be Jan Gabriel, who happened to be a good friend of mine, the late, great Jan Gabriel. And I asked him, how do you get the race at Santa Fe Speedway? And he basically said, Well, you got to have a professional license. And in order to get a professional license, you have to race for 2 years. You have to accumulate points, or you have to show that you have experience for...
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, for 2 years. So lucky for me, I'm driving a coffee truck. This is when I was also Coffee Dan. So that's the other thing I'm pretty proud of, being Coffee Dan. Joe Scarlatta was also driving a coffee truck. He picked up a 250 OSA, and he wanted to go race motorcycles. So Joe had the OSA, and we would go to Sycamore Speedway. And they would run like Saturday nights motorcycle racing. And Joe bet me $10 that I wouldn't race that year. That was 1970. So by the end of he bet me $10. So by the end of the year, the last race at Sycamore Speedway, which would have been end of August probably, I took the headlight off my Triumph and the tail light, made number plates, got the trailer from HUD, tied the bike on there with ropes, didn't even have straps, you know, tying ropes around, hoping it doesn't fall off the trailer. And I raced my first race at Sycamore Speedway. And I won $10 from Joe. I didn't win any money at the race because I was dead last. But I did win Joe gave me $10.
Very nice.
The next week was Millburg Speedway had a race. So I went to Millburg Speedway and I raced there. So that was my first season, was only 2 races.
Okay.
To get ready for the next year, now if you look through the pictures, flip through the couple pictures. There's my Triumph sitting in the garage there. And go to the next, and here's my Triumph. There's another picture of my Triumph. So it was just basically, there's my Triumph. After I painted the gas tank, I found a gas tank from a BSA. And seat was like a road race seat that I picked up. And that was my race bike. But I must have been pretty wealthy back then, because I'm driving a coffee truck. I also bought a 1970 Triumph Bonneville that I was customizing.
Very nice.
So I guess I had money back then. If I had this bike, I could have just a race. I had the Triumph bike that I was getting everything chromed on. And then I raced at Sycamore Speedway. So if you look at these pictures here, these are pictures from from Millburg Speedway. But that was 1971. Like I said, I only raced 2 races. I now know who. Some of these pictures were taken by my friend Jesse Hernandez, and some of these pictures were taken by Tom Yunker. My friend came out, and Tom Yunker also filmed a race. I had an 8mm camera, and he did a great job. And that's what we're going to show right now. Film from 1971, Millburg Speedway, and Tom Yunker showing me, or showing a race that I was in.
Very nice.
So let's check that out right now. My good friend, the late great Tom Yunker, was standing on top of my Dodge van. There was my little brother Joey helping me adjust the clutch as I head on over to the start-finish line. It is Jerry Scheffler who was the starter, and Ken, his younger brother, did the staging. So they have a conversation. Jerry gets back into the circle and gets ready to start this race. I am on the inside, running second place, and then I let off the gas a little bit, going through turn 3 and 4, and I'm running in 3rd place. So this probably would have been in July or August. I do not have the names of the other racers in this race, but we were running the B class, Open B. There was an A class, and those guys were a lot faster. One of the people I remember was Punk Wells racing his Harley in the Open A class, and he really flew around Millburg Speedway.
See, I'm trying to catch up with the bike in second place. But this is how you learn how to race. If you wanted to race motorcycles, you went to amateur racing to learn how to race. And I should point out that my Triumph is just a stock 650 Bonneville, but I did buy a Cherry front end that I still have on my Trackmaster Triumph today. As you can see, hundreds of people came out to the races. There was a class for everybody. 85 cc's, 125, 100s, 250, a little slow motion here, 400s, and then the open class. Of the two racetracks back then, Millburg Speedway and Sycamore Speedway, I did like Millburg a little bit better, but it was 100 miles to drive to Millburg, where Sycamore was only about 50 miles. And at the end, as we look across, it is me getting off the ground. I crashed at the finish line. When the checkered flag came out, I came through the last corner too quick, and I lost it and went down at the start-finish line as I dust myself off. Now let's go back to my conversation with Taylor.
So Grandpa, I see you got a picture here with your first trophy at Sycamore Speedway. Got a story about that?
Well, you know, somebody made a remark, because I ran a motocross a couple years ago. And, you know, riding an old vintage motocross bike on a motocross track, I did not motocross. Back in that era, now we got to say, motocross was just coming into America in the late 60s and into the 70s. So they, Floyd, do you want to be in this too? Okay. So motocross was coming along. So I never motocrossed. I was not a motocrosser.
Okay.
So I was a flat track racer. And I'm at this motocross track, and I'm just riding around because I'm doing a TV show. And someone said, was he ever any good? Well, no, I was not ever a great, you know, when you talk of all the greats, I mean, I name hundreds of greats that race motorcycles, and they had a lot of talent. I was never that great. So in this picture here, now, the checkered flag is on me, and that's John Schultz, who was a good friend of mine, and he was a much better racer, and I sort of remember in that race chasing him for 8 or 10 laps. So, and in fact, that trophy, I found that exact trophy, and I gave it to Ken Rotman, who's up in Kenosha, because he has that picture blown up, because he's a good friend of John Schultz. So that's a great story about that picture. But I don't think I won that race, but even though the checkered flag. But go inside, and I must have taken, in this picture, I have a trophy for 3rd place.
Oh, yeah.
And that's Paul Peckinpah and Jim Schmitt with DT, who was a junior rider. Peckinpah was an amateur. I mean, we're all amateurs, amateur racing. And I have an old helmet, old open-face Bell helmet. So that is definitely prior to that other picture. So I probably took a 3rd place at Sycamore Speedway. But during that year, 1971, I ran Millburg. Millburg ran every other weekend. So I probably ran Millburg 8 times, and that was TT racing on Sunday. Once in a while they would let us run on the short track, and I did run the short track. But going back to that film that I showed, when I seen that film, I never won a race up until that point, and I seen my problem. In the film, I'm letting off going into that first corner downhill, and that's where everybody's going by me. So after seeing that film, and then my dad went to the next race at Millburg Speedway, and I won that race. So my dad's showing up at the first race, I end up winning that race. So that was so. I mean, I have a lot of trophies. I mean, I really wanted to race professional, so I had to do the 2 years, and that was my main thing, is running 2 years amateur, and then I had enough well, I could prove, because I ran AMA races, and the AMA, American Motorcycles Association, are the ones that gave the license. So to become a professional racer, if you want to go on, well, here's a great picture of Joe Scarlatta with his wife Laura, and she was absolutely gorgeous. And there's Joe going over to jump at Millburg, and that's. But he drove a coffee truck like I did, and towards the end, I mean, we were seeing each other every morning. We were both loading up out of Door Brothers, and you know.
There's the coffee truck right there.
Yeah, well, that's when I with Meals on Wheels. So that's how I started. I started out leasing the truck, and I worked with Meals on Wheels, which, you know, it was a great job. I mean, 22 years I did the coffee truck. It was big fun, big fun. So let's go over to, all right, so here's a list. Now, I wasn't racing in 1970, but this is when I went to Santa Fe Speedway. But turn the pages here. These are just people that would race at Santa Fe Speedway. This wasn't all the professional racers in the country. These were people that would come to Santa Fe. Santa Fe Speedway on Wednesday nights was like going to the Super Bowl. I mean, they were all the top riders in the country would be at Santa Fe Speedway racing. So it was really, you know, it was really quite to be part of Santa Fe. I mean, it was definitely what made professional racing. Picture there and turn, but because it was also set up, I could run TT. So that's a TT, because at Santa Fe Speedway, they had a kidney-shaped TT track. So you went around the oval, and then you would go into the infield, and they had a jump. So there's a picture of me going over the jump. And you can see on that picture, I have a front wheel that's got a brake on it. Compared to this picture, when I'm short tracking, there's no front brake. So that was becoming part of the world of professional racing. And at Santa Fe Speedway, there'd be 100 riders would show up. Everybody had to qualify. So you would run one lap against the clock, and then the fastest, either the fastest 24 or the fastest 32 made the real program.
Oh, really?
Then the next 60 would make the B program. So the A program would be either 3 heats of 8 or 4 heats of 8, then 2 semis, and then a final. The B program would be 6 heats of 10. First 2 out of each heat would make a 12-man B final. If you won the B final, you won $40. If you won the A final, and you won the trophy dash and all that, if you were if you were the top qualifiers, you could have made like $165 or $200. The winner, winning the semi, winning the heat race, winning the trophy dash. So those guys like Gary Nixon and that, they would be at Santa Fe. That would be their living. The money they made at Santa Fe then gave them the money where they could go run other races on the weekend. So there was literally, at that time, 40 to 50 guys in the country that were professional, really running, making a living racing. You know, and I talk like Gary Nixon. The year he won number one in 1967, he made about $40,000. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot of money nowadays. But back then, a professional baseball player, if you played for the Bears, I mean, if you played for the Cubs, you made about $40,000 a year. There weren't no $1 million contracts back then.
Right.
So a football player might make $30,000, $25,000. Baseball player might make $40,000. I mean, Mickey Mantle probably made $60,000. So that's how competitive it was. Right. So I only made 34.5 points as a novice first year, 1972. That picture there was from Oklahoma City. I traveled with Paul Peckinpah and his brother. God, what's his brother's name? I can't think of his brother. And we went to Oklahoma City. I wanted to get them other 5.5 points I needed. Well, I didn't get them. I had to be a novice for the second year. And that's how we're going to end the show today. I hope you learned something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is this fun? I mean,
totally, yeah.
Well, I hope my audience.
Good to know the history.
Yeah. Well, I hope my audience has learned something about. I mean, because the story. I mean, motorcycle racing. I've always said some of my best friends I got through motorcycle racing, and you know yourself, Taylor. How many great people did you meet going to the racetracks with you? Hundreds.
Yeah.
All night. Did you ever run anybody that wasn't nice?
No.
Right.
Not that I can't think of.
Right, right. Everybody was nice and pleasant, and I mean, I remember you wouldn't sleep in my pickup truck when we were at the racetrack because you'd go sleep in someone's motorhome. But that's how nice people were. I mean, you would go eat with someone else. I mean, it was a party everywhere we went.
Right.
Thank you, Taylor. And before we get too far, starting in 1972, Jim Rashid and Mike Calvert, also in 71, were helping me at the races. So besides my two kids, Bridget and Danny, Jim Rashid and Mike Calvert were there to give me a hand. And it was Mike Calvert who shot this film on 8mm at a half mile. To contact me, and I'd love to hear from you, it's teamdan45@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed this look back at the history of motorcycle racing. Remember, you can always search on YouTube with Dan Schmitt Motorcycle Racing.